videos. So if you don't have your video on, then you will not get credit for being on the Zoom call. Thanks so much. Hi, Megan. Hi, everyone. Solani.
Good evening, Professor.
Can't believe the semester's over already.
Hello, Professor. Good evening.
Good evening. Things have gone very quickly, haven't they?
Good evening, Professor.
Good
Good
evening.
evening, Professor.
People are still coming in, but please turn on your videos and let me hit, okay, so I want to make sure that we're recording. Did it go? Yeah, okay. You got the little message, you heard the little message that we're recording? Okay, good. Okay. I still don't see some videos. Come on, pop those up there. Let's go. All right. She wants to see videos. Oops, wait a minute, that didn't work. Come on, I want to see videos. Let's go. Okay, I see everyone coming up a little bit. Still missing a couple. I know it'll go, may go in and out during the session, but that's okay. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the final exam, talking about the course in general, and talking more about the practicality of what it means to publish and what it means to present your information. So first, let's start with the final exam. So the final exam will be available this weekend I'll make it available on Sunday. If for some reason it's not available on Sunday, just send me a text. Hey, professor, I can't get to the final exam. I'll just make it visible and it'll be available. You have a week to do it. So I don't know, when are your final exams normally? When are your final exam? What's your final exam week is what I'm asking. Is it next week or is it the following week?
Next week.
It is next week, right? Okay. I wanted to be sure that I was kind of in line. Okay. So you have a week to do it. The exam is all multiple choice or true and false. So the answer is either right or it's wrong. If you have any questions about it, about a particular question, you can send me an email. The exam is 40 questions. Each one of those questions is worth 2 points for a total of 80 points on the exam. And you get 2 hours to take it. The difference between this and some of the other exams is you get 1 attempt. Now, if for some reason there is an act of God that knocks out your Wi-Fi in the middle of the exam and you can't finish it and you're stressed out, okay, I get it. I'll exempt, that first attempt and give you another chance. But it's 1 attempt. So just sit down, do it, and then you're done. It can be open book if you want. A lot of the questions may be from the beginning of the semester, so you may have to sort of refer back to any notes or presentations that were from the beginning of the semester. Let's see, what else about the exam? Nothing I can think of. Does anyone have any questions about the exam and how it's structured? You could raise your hand because now I can see you and it's great. Everyone turn on their videos. I know most of you have them on. If you have them on, that's not for you. It's for the people who don't have it on. There you go. Thanks, Janvi. Appreciate that. Any questions on the exam? Okay. So pretty straightforward, right? All right. So the next thing that I'd like to discuss with you is the course itself. So I think you might remember in that first week, I went over what I thought the objectives would be for this course, namely to get you to think about what it is that you're reading, and get you to sort of critically think about research and how it's put together, whether or not it's worthy of your time, and whether or not what you're reading is actually valid. Did anyone get that out of this course? I want to know if you look at research in a different way. Do you look at it with a different lens? Turn on those videos.
I really liked the articles that were talking about how you have to be more critical because a lot of them are like false information or like the data is not accurate, because I didn't really think of, I don't know, I always just thought research was all true, kind of. So
That is definitely one of the objectives of this class. And there is some good research out there, don't get me wrong, there is. But you see like how things slip through the cracks, right? Was anyone, how about out of all the people here, was anyone not surprised at some of the articles you were reading? You were kind of like, yeah, of course, that's what I always thought about research. Most of you were surprised at what you were reading? Would you say? I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads.
Yes, it was
Yes,
like for me it was, yeah, I knew that there were some researchers which were not accurate, or there are cases, but the impact which those falsely reported cases, or the plagiarized articles that they have on society, that was a big surprise from me. Like, oh, this can also happen. That's
Yeah, and in any industry, of course, you're going to have people who try to get around the system, or they're unethical, they're going to try to game the system. When it comes to research, though, because it's information that's then widespread and people use it, they use it practically. It's kind of a shame that people take advantage that way, right? In reading a lot of your commentary, especially in one of the last assignments, assignment number 4, I asked the question whether or not you would take it head on. What I meant is, are you going to be active in determining not only for yourself what you should read and what's valid and being vigilant, but for other people to kind of pass this on? And not to say that researchers are all liars. That's not the point of the course, but to say, read this with a little bit of skepticism. Look at this with a very critical lens. And I was pleased to see that most of you will. So here's my question now. You can do a show of hands if you want. How many of you think that you in the future will be doing your own research studies? 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, do you see this as being sort of assisting somebody in a research study, or like taking it on? This is something you want to do. You want to, do some research on your own. I don't see any hands up anymore. Do you want this to be something you do in the future?
Sir, Professor,
No.
I would like to go for both, like assisting someone so that it will be helpful to me also while assisting if we are getting into some other rejections, and other thing is I would be like to do my research alone as well.
Okay. And let me ask you this. Can one of you, what area of interest do you have? What might be an area of interest in which you might like to do some research?
Professor, I would like to go for a research for a therapeutic fitness where, along with the physical therapy exercises and the fitness exercises, people will be helpful in reduction of their basic, or we can say the most prioritized disorders which they are facing, like hyperthyroidism, diabetes, and obesity, which is seen a lot nowadays.
Sure. Now, one thing is that you might want to narrow that a little bit and focus on a particular population, right? Because if you're focusing on a lot of different chronic disease, it might be difficult to get the number of participants you need, right? And then you're going to have to like control for each aspect of that. But if you did it in just say individuals in type 2 diabetes, you might have an easier time recruiting, and then you would have an easier time controlling against that, right? So keeping it a little bit narrow. Yeah, go ahead, Sonali.
Yes, Professor, I agree with you what you said about like selecting the quantity has to be quality as well the population size has to be more accurate.
Absolutely, I agree. And one thing I would say is that if you're going to do research on your own, that's awesome. You know, it's a challenge. There's no doubt about it. But one thing that you want to keep in mind, and the director of my doctoral program told me this over 30 years ago at this point. Do not try to save the world, right? Don't try to do everything in one time, in one shot. If research is going to be what you do, then you'll have many, many opportunities to study many, many different aspects of your area of interest. But don't try to do everything at one time. Make it simple. Keep it simple. Have you ever heard of the KISS principle? Keep it simple, stupid. It really is about keep it simple, stupid, because if you do that, the chance of you being successful is a lot higher because you don't have all of these sort of intricate things that you have to worry about because they're coming from all angles. If you keep it simple, you study a population, maybe you study the effect of exercise, you study the effect of a diet, you study the effect of a pharmaceutical, whatever it is, keep it simple, and then it will be a lot easier to get through. And then your second study could be on another aspect of what you studied. You can kind of, instead of reinventing the wheel, you can kind of do something a little bit different. That's all. So very important to not save the world your first go round. Okay. Are there any other questions about the course? Where to go from here? Does anyone have future plans in taking other courses related to research methods? Tanvi? Yeah. I can't see you though. Oh. You were muted. Were you saying something?
No, Professor.
I need to see you. I need to see that you're here. All I see is a little circle. Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
Okay, you're outside. It's
Yeah.
nice out there.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. All right, I need 2 more videos on Hitakshi, and I don't know who that is. Turn on your video. Oh, you're outside too. Are you in the same place?
Yeah, she's here with me.
Oh, that is
Yeah,
so
together.
funny. That is so funny. Okay. All right, I think we have everybody. I'm missing one video. Is it, let me see, who is it? S. Kalidas, but I don't know the first name. I have to go back to your roster and look. Can you pop your video? As soon as you pop your video on, we're good. Solani, your video went off. I know I'm being a real pain. Hey, all right. Now you guys are welcome to turn your videos off, and I'm going to share with you the presentation and go through it. And listen, if you want to engage, it's entirely up to you. If you want to go cook dinner, that's fine too. And I'll be talking to myself. But this is, I think, this presentation is about the practicality of research, and specifically more about the practicality of publishing and presentation. Now, when it comes to presentation, I am sure of it that you guys have presented to your classes in other courses, maybe not on research, but on something. I think what I'm presenting to you, you probably know a lot, you know this stuff, but I do think these are good general concepts to keep in mind. So you are welcome to turn your videos off. Last thing I'll say to you is please check your grade book. It always happens every single semester that there is a grade that is not put in the grade book. Someone handed something in, it got lost, or whatever it is. Check your grade book and make sure that you have grades for everything you've handed in. I am currently right now, this Zoom call needs to be graded, but also assignment 6. So I have all of your assignment 6s, and I'll go through that, and then the final exam. And I think that's the last thing. But if you're missing something, like from the beginning of the semester, just let me know. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Let me just see if that screen is up. It is. And let's do this. Okay. All right, so in a moment, you should see the research methods presentation. Do you see it? Can everyone
Yes.
see it? Okay, good. All right,
Yes.
so this little cartoon says a lot. As you can see, these 6 people are waiting to beat up this poor scientist. And it's really a metaphor for what publishing is like. It is a gauntlet, it is a challenge, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. So, I think it is very noble and very much admired if you're going to go through this process. It's very it is definitely satisfying. There's no doubt about it at the end of the road, but the road is definitely fraught with challenges. So why do we publish? Well, for some people, no publication means no project. I mean, they have to publish. There's no other way to sort of keep their job. I'll talk about that in a moment. And research is not done until it's published. So you could do all the research you want. Like, for instance, I published a research study about 5 years ago on the effect of swearing on and exercise, and I may have talked about it earlier in the course. And we studied, I think we had 59 participants, all from LIU. And we looked at, people swearing and not swearing and the effect of cycling, the amount of force they could generate during a cycling test. So we tried to replicate the study by actually using more common exercises like a plank, a push-up, and a sit-up. And we were able to get about 40 or so participants at LIU. And the person I was actually doing the study with was from England. So he was going to go back to his lab in England and recruit the other participants. And when we did the power calculation beforehand, we found that we needed about, I think it was roughly 120 is what we needed. We ended up with 60. So we ended up with half. And the reason was, one word, COVID. COVID destroyed the study because we couldn't bring anybody into the lab, and doing it online was not part of the way we set up our methods. So it really changed things. And a few years passed, 4 years passed, and we decided to scrap it. So we did the research, but it doesn't matter. I can't speak to it because it was never published. The data was never really collected at the end, and we didn't analyze it, and can't really say anything. So it's a little bit of a bummer. It took a lot of time and effort, but research is only done until it's published. The opportunity to think more clearly about your work and its meaning. So we publish because, one, we get a lot of feedback from our publication, from our research, and that gives us a sense of purpose. It gives us a sense of meaning. It helps us to delve into the details of our research. We think about things a little bit differently when we look at our research that is published versus just research we do and kind of don't do anything with. It's also a yardstick of productivity, for sure. In many cases, publications are the ways that that people measure academic status and academic rigor. and you share the wealth for sure. I mean, why do we publish? We publish because we want to add to the literature. We want to add to what's there and give people new ideas and, you know, move science forward. Now, in some cases, no publication means no funding. It's not as true now, but you know, look, there are big grants that a lot of professors work through, and so they are hired on a grant. Grant is something that you know you write an application to a particular industry or company, and they give you money for a particular project, and that professor might be hired for that project. So if they don't publish, they get fired. In some cases, again, not as common these days, but like Harvard and some of the other Ivy League schools, it was always publish or perish. So either you were publishing or you were not working there. Um, still, still the case in some places. And keeping grants too. So tangible evidence of progress, right? So if you're not publishing, the grantor, the people who gave you the money is like, what are you doing with the money? You know, you're not buying a car, you're not, you know, buying a boat. What are you doing with the money? So if you're not publishing and using the money the way that it was intended, you'll be questioned for it. And it is, you know, publishing your work is in many cases vital for success. Whether it be success individually, the way you sense success, or success the way other people perceive it. Now, what makes a good paper? Well, we talked about this throughout the course, right? The experimental design. The design is really, really important because people will pick it apart even after you've collected your data. That's the worst thing that could happen. So for instance, you don't have a control group and you think your study is amazing and you got all this data and it proves your hypothesis, and someone goes, you don't have a control group. And so just that reasoning could be fatal. It could make your research worth nothing. So it really is about a defendable experimental design. The way that you set up your study should tell a good story. It should be engaging. Whether it be the participants you work with or the type of intervention you do or even the way you write it, it needs to be a good story. It needs to have clear and concise figures and tables. We talked about this. This was assignment 5, right? How do we put our data into the right visual representation? If we don't visually represent it the correct way, the story gets lost. So we need to be able to tell the story through pictures as well as through text. It advances the understanding in a scientific area. So it leads other scientists to think differently. And I think that's a really cool thing. You know, you can, I still get, like, you know, I've done some publishing in my time, right? And I still get emails about articles that I've published. You know, can you share with me this? Or I just read this article and, you know, I'm curious about this. And it's amazing. I mean, it's been years, 10 years, 12 years. But if it advances the science forward and makes scientists think differently, then they question things, and that's what it's all about. That's how we move science forward. It suggests possible areas for future investigation. Again, we've learned this, right? Looking at limitations. Not every study is going to cover everything, so there will always be limitations. Other things that we can do. So we state for future investigations, we should be looking at this. And that just gives scientists the open door to then go and do their research to move the science forward. And also, it needs to have a well thought out hypothesis. It can't just be something you throw down because you don't want to find significance when there is none, and you don't want to have significance and not find it. So your hypothesis needs to be well crafted, needs to be thoughtful, needs to be somewhat critical, and you can work with other scientists and other colleagues, you know, to get to that point. Now, the writing order. Here's the way that we put this together, right? This is the suggested order in how you might write a research study. 1, you start with the methods. Why? Because the methods are the way you conducted the study. This is how you did it. So it should be very, very easy to write up the methods. You could also look at other methods that have been written and how did they write those methods? Even in an area in which you have interest or another published study that you've referenced. Look at their methods and see how they wrote the methods. But the methods are pretty, I don't want to say easy, but what I mean is they're convenient, right? There's something that you've already worked on. You know how the methods, you know the methods you use, you know the equipment you used. You probably know where the equipment was made. You know specifics about it. So again, the method should be the first thing you write. The second thing you write are the results. And why? Because you have the results. You already have the data. So write up the results. Again, look back to another article that was used as reference and see how they wrote it and kind of use it as a template. Now, the discussion and the introduction are interesting, right? The discussion is, I always think about, when I read a discussion, I think about a roundtable discussion. I think about 4 or 5 people sitting around a table, and each one of those scientists or people have published their own work. And you are discussing with them their work. You know, Jim, I don't really concur with you. I don't agree with you on your findings. I think my study looked at it a little differently, and this is why we found this. Your study only looked at, females. My study looked at males and females, and we found completely different, we had different findings. So it's a discussion, it's a conversation. That's the way the discussion should be written. Now, it is written in kind of a scientific tone, but at the same time, it really is a conversation. So maybe you write the discussion next, because now you have your results and you have your methods. So the next piece might be the conversation. The introduction is really more about showing people what's been done before, right? Here are all the articles that have been published in this area before. This is the general consensus. Here's the sort of the general, like the wider impact, right? If you're doing something on exercise and type 2 diabetes, you could talk about how exercise is so beneficial to insulin and blood sugar, and how it's been studied in type 2 diabetes, and you're giving basically a general overview. But the absolute key to the introduction is that it narrows to a purpose, statement. The reason we are doing this study is because whatever the reason is, right? If the introduction doesn't narrow to a purpose, then you have no idea why they're doing this research, right? All you know is general information about the topic, but you don't know why they're actually doing the research. So the introduction could be the next thing you write. Then you're going to come up with a title. It's much easier to come up with a title after you've done some writing, because now in your head, you have sort of this idea of, this is what my study's about. So you can craft the title that way. Don't start with the title, because then you're probably going to change it based on what you write, in the introduction and discussion. And the last is the abstract. And what's interesting about the abstract is abstracts are usually somewhere between 250 to 350 words. They're short, as you know, you've read a lot of them. They have the background, they have the methods, they have the results, they have the conclusion, or the sort of 1 sentence or 2 sentence conclusion. The abstracts are very hard to write, because basically you're taking your entire study and you're whittling it down to a half a page. I used to work with a cardiologist who was an absolute wizard at writing abstracts. He could write one in 5 minutes, and it always, I was envious of him and also in awe of the fact that he could do that. But he was able to do it. He was able to synthesize in his head what he wanted to write in a very, very short, concise way. So again, if you do a lot of writing before the abstract becomes a little bit easier. And of course, how do you sort of, how do you indicate who might be the author who's listed first versus the author who's listed last? Rule of thumb is the one who does the most work on a project gets first authorship, lead author. If you have people who collaborate with you, maybe somebody who did the statistics, or someone who analyzed the results, or someone who helped you write the introduction or methods, they would get second or third authorship. The last author is often the senior person. So if you're collaborating with somebody who is senior to you, they're maybe older, they have more experience, or it's their lab that you're using, then you give them that last authorship. It's a nod to them. It's a little bit of a privilege. to have that, notation. So that's kind of how you do it. Now, if you work with somebody who doesn't do any work and takes first authorship, never do another research project with that person again. That is just not a classy way to do it. It really should go to the person who does the most work. Now, how do you start? Well, a couple of things, right? You're going to start with an outline. Talk to yourself about, what the project looks like. What are the important pieces of it? Finding journals that really help you in terms of crafting your research study and your idea. I think outlines are a great way to start. It provides a skeleton of thought, and then you can fill in the pieces as you go. And if you want, your outline could be introduction, methods, results, and discussion. And in the introduction, you would have like all of the research studies you're looking at, right? All of the ones that, we're doing diabetes and exercise, all the diabetes research studies, all the exercise research studies, all the ones that have looked at type 2 or type 1, all the ones that have looked at a particular type of exercise, whatever it is that you're doing in your research, you want your outline to be a skeleton, but then you want to fill in the blanks to make it very specific. Of course, you're going to talk about authorship, most likely at some point during the research study. You don't want to do it at the end. You want to do it at the beginning because you want to set expectations. If you do it at the end, you're likely to get to the point where like somebody's going to be upset because they didn't get second authorship, but they did more work than the other person, but you sort of decided that later. You should be deciding that in the beginning. And the task delegation, that's in the beginning. You're going to set up basically, here's my statistician. You're going to do all the analysis of the results. You're going to help me write the introduction. I want you to help me analyze what all, the various journal articles, put them together, prioritize them, then we're going to write the introduction together. So you want to delegate that initially. You don't want to do that like mid-project because something happens or somebody can't meet that responsibility, and then that's a real pain. That becomes very difficult. You want to decide on a journal pretty early on. I don't know if I would decide on a journal after I'm done. I would pretty much decide like 3 different journals at the beginning. You know what your research project is on, you know what the protocol is, you know what the methods are, and you know what other journals have published that are similar to yours. I would try to decide on a journal early. You're going to stop and start. There's no doubt about it. Research is not a linear sort of experience. It's not like I start on Monday and I finish next Friday. It does not work that way. You're dealing with mostly human beings, unless you're doing animal research, or retro, or you're doing some kind of research that is where you're looking at data in the past. Therefore, you don't have to worry about people showing up to your lab. But if you are working with human beings, you know that working with human beings is unpredictable, and there are unexpected things that happen, and your research may stop, and it may start and stop and start. So you need to just stay with it. And that's why that whole gauntlet, right? That gauntlet of publication has to do with not only the peer reviewers and the people who are going to beat you up at the end, but it's the beatings you take as you go through the process, where you're stopping and starting, or there's somebody, something happens and one of your collaborators leaves your university, and now can they collaborate on this project? It's all of these things. So those things happen. And of course, enough data versus too much data. I personally think that doing a power calculation beforehand is very helpful, because it does give you a sense of what you need in order for your research to be not significant, but in order for it to be at least valid in sort of the eyes of statistics. So, you don't want to collect too much data and then have like so much that you have to analyze, from here till next Thursday. You want enough data so that it helps you to prove your hypothesis, but also that it's enough that you can analyze what you have and feel confident that you've done your part in collecting the data. some things to think about. This is really, really important. And it's basically about the way we write and the way we conduct our science. So neither good nor great writing makes up for poor science. Poor writing can mask good science. If you're not a good writer, then you need to take a writing course, because writing scientific literature is very specific. It's very formulaic. And again, as you read journal articles, you'll see it. It is very, very routine. It's not flowery. It's not very conversational. There's no jargon. It's not TikTok. It's nothing like that. It's very, very formulaic. So if you don't write that way, you can mask a really good project, meaning your poor writing can kind of, hide what your science is trying to say. Plan early on before your experiments begin. Really plan your writing style and your writing structure even before your experiments begin. It's so important to get that down, because then when you collect your data and you analyze your data, you already have your writing style in place, and then you can, more easily write your project out. Definitely discuss details with collaborators. All of the research that I've ever published, I've published with people who have collaborated. Some much smarter than me, and some much more experienced, and I leaned on them for their expertise, and it has paid dividends. So in order to get my doctorate, I had to publish while I was at LIU, and I collaborated with many, many professors in the physical therapy department, and they were brilliant, and they had already published a lot. So they were able to share with me their experiences. Highly recommend that. And practice, really just practice your writing. I know that sounds silly, but try to practice your writing and send it to people to say, does this sound right? Like, does this flow? Am I getting the right story here? Am I getting the point across? Very important. Okay, let's talk a little bit about presentation. So are there any questions on publishing and writing and how we sort of set up our structure when we're doing our research? Any questions on that?
Are you allowed to like try and publish at multiple journals at the same time, or no?
That's a great question. The answer is no, you're not. There will be a question when you fill out your application, when you submit your application, that question will be, are you sending this to any other journals? And the answer is no. It's not. So the reason they do that is they don't want you. What if you're accepted at both journals? It's not your prerogative to turn them down. It's their prerogative to turn you down. So if you get rejected from a journal, by all means go to another one, but you can't submit to multiple journals at one time, the same information. Any other questions? That was a good question. Okay, let's move on. So when we're presenting, you guys have probably seen many a presentation of many students, and you're probably looking at the slide like, I cannot believe this is what this slide looks like. And I can't believe I've been here for an hour listening to the same thing. So if you're presenting your research, a couple of things to keep in mind. One, be short, be brief, and be gone, right? 10 minutes is probably what your research presentation should take. Don't spend 20 minutes, 15 minutes. Most people have very short attention spans, so 10 minutes should be good. You may want to give an opportunity or an option. If people want more detail, then you can say, at a different time, I would like to present some extra detail, or we could do this offline. We could do it out of this meeting or away from this presentation. Always, 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 always rehearse your talk. Time yourself. Most of the time, people talk very quickly when they present, but you would be very surprised at how time flies when you're presenting. they say time flies when you're having fun. It also flies when you're presenting. You will be really surprised that, oh my God, I've been going 8 minutes. I'm only on slide 5. So just rehearse your talk, rehearse your timings. And of course, make edits if you need to. And if you need to end a bit early, that's fine. Because if you're given 10 minutes and your talk is 12, it really does show that you haven't prepared your talk. So if you're, let's say you're presenting at a conference, they're going to tell you you have from 3:45 to 4, and that's with Q&A. And you have 5 minutes of Q&A. So you have 10-minute presentation and 5 minutes questions and answers. You want your presentation to be 10 minutes. You don't want it to be 13, because what if you have a lot of questions? Now you go over and you really look, you look unprepared. So try to stay to your timing. Very important to know your audience. This is in general. Always know your audience. My wife always says, know your audience, and it's really true. You want to know who you're speaking to. So if, for instance, you are, I don't know, you're an exercise physiologist, or you're a real technical person when it comes to exercise, and you're speaking to a group of undergraduate students, don't use technical terms, because they're not going to know what you're talking about. Now, if you're speaking to people with 20 years of experience in your field, use technical terms. You could use the jargon that's often used in the field or in the industry, but be careful of using jargon and acronyms without defining these things, because a lot of people really won't know what it is that you're referring to. So that's important. And as far as a general audience is concerned, ask what educational people not in your field will know. So, like, ask yourself, okay, if I have people who are smart, right? They're bright people, they're educated people, but they're not in my field. What might they know about this, and what might they not know about this? And kind of craft your presentation about, that way. And as I said, define any terms that you might think would be unfamiliar. Now, a great way to do this is to present this to somebody who's not in your field, to get an idea where they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So you need to define that, right? Defining something even to an audience who is technically sort of apt and they understand it is okay. That's okay. I mean, you're just providing a definition. So I think it's worse when it's not defined and it's an audience who doesn't know what you're talking about. And make an effort to explain the significance of your research in terms the listeners are likely to understand. So don't say, we had a p-value of less than 0.5. This is totally significant, and it's going to have a great impact on the industry. You need to be detailed about it. So if you're doing, exercise and diabetes, you can say this will significantly impact the practical applications that are used in physical therapy. And here are some examples of how our data can be used. Like, you really want people to walk away with information that is practical and usable and functional. They're coming to hear your technical stuff, but they're also coming to hear the practical application, the content. This is really, oh, you have a question? Yeah, go ahead.
So Saloni is kicked out by mistake. So can you just add her?
Oh, what happened? I'm sorry, what?
Saloni Ramani is kicked out by mistake.
Oh, yeah,
Close the app.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hold on. I'm
Okay,
admitting
sir.
them right now. Sorry about that. Sorry, Saloni. You're back in the fold. Okay. Can you see the presentation again? Yes? Just give me a yes.
Yes, sir.
Professor.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so as far as the content, I would say think about the big picture rather than the details. So, think about the context of the study and what it is that you're trying to get across. What's the message you want to get across? Again, you don't have like a lot of time, but I do think that it is important to focus on sort of what is the context of your research? How is it that you came to this question? Because I think that's part of the story, right? And that could be like one slide. That doesn't have to be, a long time, but give people an idea of where you're coming from, where is the context of the research. And then, ask yourself, what will the audience remember as the most interesting thing about this research? What would be the most sort of common takeaway that would be related to this research? And then what are some of the surprises or pitfalls? Ask yourself, like, what would the audience be surprised at in terms of your findings? And then what's the message you really want to convey, right? So what's the message? What's the takeaway? What's the practical application, as I mentioned before? And what do you want the audience to learn? What do you want them to remember? And what's the main point you want them to remember? So there's a lot to remember when you present research, right? I mean, they could remember pieces of your methods. They could remember your findings. They could remember a little bit about the discussion or the limitations. But what's the main point here? If they were to apply your research tomorrow, what do you want them to remember about it? And I think if you can present your data or your research that way, you've done an amazing job, because people will walk out of your presentation like, that was so useful. And now I can take this back to my university, my lab, wherever they're going, and use it, right? And so usable data, I think, is just so great. Okay, a couple of organizational tips. One, always introduce yourself, but obviously if you're presenting at a conference, you will be introduced most likely by a moderator or a panel member. But if not, introduce yourself and say sort of where you're from. That will also be on your first slide, your title slide, right? You are so-and-so, this is your university, here's the date, and then this is the presentation you're giving. Present your research question and why it matters. I think that is an important piece because it gives context to the rest of your presentation, and it also is part of the organization and flow of your presentation. Describe how you conducted your research. So in a sense, that speaks to your methods, but why did you start asking the questions you asked? So, why was this the question, and how did you actually conduct your research? Explain what you found. So what are your findings and why it's important? And then conclude with a summary of your main points. And again, I think the takeaway is really important here. What are people going to take away from your presentation that they can use? Be judicious in the amount of information you give, and don't let the discussion get you off track. So, meaning you want to be very aware of the information you provide. So when you are setting up your slides, 4 or 5 bullets is enough. Don't have a bullet with a gigantic paragraph underneath and another bullet with a gigantic paragraph underneath. You should be speaking to the audience like I am, not even looking at my information, speaking and talking about your presentation, about your data, about your research. Let them look at the bullets, right? But the bullets are just sort of the main points of that slide. And then you're just going off and you're talking about those pieces of information, and you're providing detail to those pieces of information. And this is why it's so important to rehearse your presentation, because if you're speaking to the audience, engage with the audience, they know you're prepared because you're speaking to what's on the slide, but you're not reading what's on the slide. And that is a key when it comes to presentations. Bring the focus back to your research by reminding the audience of your research question. And don't think about opening your PowerPoint until you've organized your ideas and decided on your main points. And of course, that is, I think, a really important part, right? So that is your practice. Decide on the main points. Decide on how you're going to write your publication. Decide on how you're going to bring your presentation to life. Decide on those main points first, and then start your practicing, bring your presentation together after you've kind of critically thought about what those main points and main takeaways are. Using PowerPoint, I mentioned it. Do not read from the slide. It becomes a very boring, mundane exercise, and your audience will be lost. They won't even be lost. They'll be bored. You don't want to read from a really busy slide. You want, again, a few bullets just like this, maybe an image that's funny if you want, or an image that's more relevant to what the bullet states. but one image, maybe two, is good. You don't want images popping up all over the place unless that's your slide, right? Maybe you're saying like there are so many different ways of exercising and you have these things pop up, the slide stays on for 30 seconds and you go to your next one. That's it. But again, limit the bullets and speak to the audience, not to the slide. Emphasize the important points and guide your audience in following the argument that you're making, right? Make sure that your presentation has flow from the first slide to the 10th or 12th or however many slides you have. PowerPoint do's and don'ts. The don'ts we talked about, presenting too much information on a slide, very difficult to read. I know you think as the presenter that you want to have all this information because it's really, really important, but the people in the audience can't read it and it's lost. The information is lost. So maybe what you could do is you could whittle down all of that information into 4 bullets and then speak to it for a minute on the 4 bullets, or even a minute and a half, 2 minutes if you need that time. But it's important that you condense all of that information. Spend extra time on making fancy PowerPoint presentations with moving images and graphics. You're not making a movie. It's not iMovie. It is a PowerPoint presentation. If you have a GIF that's cute, which I've had before, like a little chihuahua exercising on a treadmill, yeah, it's cute. Your slide's going to be up for 25 seconds. People are going to giggle. The chihuahua keeps going and going and going. You make your point, and then you're off to the next slide. But don't make a movie. No one wants to see a movie. Again, if you have a video embedded, that's completely different. But you know, you don't want to distract from the information that you're trying to present. Here are the do's. Explain what each chart or graph indicates. A good chart tells a great story. So go through the chart, explain what it indicates. Here's my line graph. This is showing from time A to time C, the change in how, people performed, the change in the side effect of the pharmaceutical, whatever it is. So tell the story through the visual representation. Use charts and graphs to convey the information clearly, and prepare to give your talk even if technology fails. Key point. Murphy's Law will always, and it will rear its ugly head every single time. You could have the most high-tech conference room you've ever seen, and I guarantee you that something is not going to work. Your flash drive doesn't work. The file's corrupt. You forgot your laptop. The Wi-Fi is down in the hotel you're presenting. I don't care what it is. It's going to go wrong. So have other ways, other methods of presenting your information. So you can send your information to the conference, ahead of time. You could have it printed out. You could have it on your laptop. You could have it on your flash drive. You could have it on your MP3. You could have it in so many. You could have it on your cloud, wherever you want it, or wherever you need it. That's where you have to have it. You should have like 3 to 4 methods of delivering it, so that if something goes wrong, you always have a backup. The tone. Okay, so when it comes to a scientific presentation, you do want to be formal. You don't want to start off with a joke unless you're the keynote speaker. If you're a keynote at a conference, meaning you're the person who's giving a 45-minute talk on the industry, on all of the research that's been done in this field, great. Start with a joke. Do not start with a joke if you have 10 slides to present. You just don't have the time. And I think it's also, it's a little off-putting. You want to be formal. It is a scientific conference. You're presenting scientific data. Treat your audience and your topic with respect. It is important that you treat individuals with respect, especially if they have questions. Dr. Spear, your data makes no sense. We found some research studies 2 years ago that showed something completely different. Although I do understand that, and I appreciate the data that has been, collected in the past, I want to point out how our research is different. Like that way, right? Be very cordial, be very argumentative, but in a respectful way. Don't say, dude, you don't know what you're talking about. Your data sucks and my data is right. Like, that's not the way you want to go about it. And I know you guys know that, and that's obviously an extreme example, but you want to treat your audience with respect. Even if you know everyone in the room, you're presenting to a group of people you know, still introduce yourself if you have not been introduced. Again, that shows class, preparation, and formality. And don't address audience members by you guys, right? So don't say, you guys are right. You don't want to do that. You don't want to basically make generalizations about the audience. You want to address the audience as individuals if you can. So addressing somebody's Q&A, a question that they have. Dr. Smith, that's an excellent question. Let me go back to slide 5 and see if I can address it. Or you want to say, you've been a wonderful, engaged audience. Thank you so much for your time and your appreciation of my data or of my research, something like that. But you don't want to say you guys. And always show passion. Oh, it says dress neatly. Well, dress neatly. I mean, don't come in sweatpants. I mean, that's silly, right? You should know that. It is a formal occasion, so dress casual, professional. Wear a nice dress, or if you're, wearing a suit, wear a suit with a tie. It also depends on the conference you're presenting at or the environment in which you're presenting in. And be passionate. Show passion toward your data, toward your work. It will engage your audience. Don't be like, so here we have a line graph that shows from point A to point D. We collected this in 2023. This is 59 subject. You're not going to do that. People will fall asleep, right? They're there for a period of time to listen to your research presentation, be engaged, and be passionate. And practice makes perfect. So, you want to practice slowly and clearly, speak slowly and clearly and enunciate every word so that people can understand what it is you are saying to them. If you want to emphasize a point, then you need to maximize that ability, right? Let's take a look at this line graph. Look at the significant drop-off of side effects when it comes to the reduction of the use of this particular pharmaceutical or the cessation of this pharmaceutical. This speaks volumes to how this can be applied in the real world. Stuff like that. Like, you want to emphasize, you want to slow it down, you want to maximize that opportunity. Do not read your talk. I mentioned it. Don't read your slides. Speak loud enough that people in the back can hear you. Maybe you have a microphone. You don't have to worry about it. But if you don't, speak loud enough. And also know that there are certain words or phrases that you might trip up on. So, for instance, in the work I do, I'm the director of wellness for a large community college system, and there's a colleague of mine who I work with, and he presents. He does this presentation on enrolling for the medical plan, for the insurance plan, but it's called the Special Medical Only Open Enrollment. And every time he says it, he trips up on it. The Special Medical Open Only Enrollment, the Special Only in the he can't say it. So practice it, because if you practice it, it will roll off your tongue. Special Medical Only Open Enrollment. Just practice it, and you will be able to enunciate and get that point across. Where you might have a tendency to throw in something new and get off track, and whether some of your transitions are not smooth enough. So normally when you're presenting, right, 10 to 12 slides, you have a flow. You know where you're going to start, where you're going to end. Most likely you're not going to go off on a tangent, but sometimes people like to tell stories, and those are in addition to the story you're trying to tell with the data you've collected. So try not to go off on a tangent, especially in a scientific presentation. Try to stick to the script. You could even write a script if you want, like, this is what I'm going to talk about in my first slide. This is what I'm going to say in my second slide. You could do that, but don't go off on a tangent, because then you'll get off track, then you'll lose your time, and then most likely, you'll go over time, and that will look like you're unprepared. Time yourself, as I mentioned, make the edits as you need to, and always, always, always practice, because a well-prepared presentation is a successful presentation. It's so appreciative when someone is well prepared when they present. They know what they're going to talk about. They know their timing. They are respectful of individuals' time and the effort it takes to listen to a presentation. And it's just all around a very classy way of doing it. And you might be asked back to present, something else. So it can also lead to success in that way. Those are the things that I wanted to talk about when it comes to, close that, close it. Oh, sorry. Hold on, one sec. Sorry. Hold on 1 second. Let me. So I'm back. Sorry about that. The dogs almost ran out. So, okay. So that's the presentation for today. Are there any questions that you have about that?
No, Professor.
No, sir.
None?
No,
Okay.
sir.
This is also a presentation that's on Brightspace, so you have access to it if you want. And I think there's an audio recording on the YouTube channel as well. I'm going to stop my screen share. Are there any questions about anything we discussed in class? Okay. This is recorded, so I'm going to wait for it to download, and then I'll put it up on Brightspace. The last one was too long and too big, so it wasn't able to be downloaded onto Brightspace, but this one should be, because it's only a little over an hour, or maybe about an hour. Sound good? Okay. If there's no other questions, please check the gradebook. Make sure that there's not anything in there that hasn't been graded that you've submitted. And if not, then have a wonderful summer, and keep in touch with me. Reach out to me if you have any questions. Like I said, the final exam will be ready on Sunday. All right. Have a wonderful night. I'm going to stop the, let's do this. I'm going to stop the recording, and have a great night.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you, Professor. Have a
Okay.
great
Thank you,
Good
sir.
Thank you,
night, everyone.
Professor.